Amaka's knees hit the cold tiled floor with a thud. Her arms wrapped tightly around a loaf of bread, tears streaming down her mud-stained face as she clutched it to her chest like a lifeline. "I'm not a thief," she sobbed, her voice trembling like the wind outside. "Please, I'm begging you. My daughter, she's dying. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. I just need this bread to save her." The giant security screens above flickered as staff gathered behind the checkout counters, whispering in shock. Customers froze. A few took out their phones to record, but the tall, dark-skinned man in an expensive navy blue kaftan didn't move. His name was Jonathan Namdi, the billionaire CEO of Namdi Mart, and he had watched the whole thing unfold from the security room. His arms were crossed, eyes locked on the woman below him. The supermarket staff expected him to shout, to call the police, to make an example of her. But instead, he stepped forward, and then he bent. To her level, Amaka didn't understand what was happening. Her fingers tightened around the loaf, her lips shook as she mumbled, "Please, sir, don't take me to prison. My name is Amaka. I've never stolen before. My daughter is Sikadana, she's 9. She's all I have left. I was beaten by the rain with her at the site. The man refused to pay me. I can't lose her too. Please, help me." Jonathan's hand slowly reached out. He didn't take the bread. He touched her shoulder. His voice was deep but calm. "You're not a thief. You're a mother. And you're a fighter." He turned to the nearest staff and said, "Pack groceries. As much as you can. Milk, fruits, cereal, diapers, clothes, everything she might need." Gasps filled the store. He turned back to Amaka, helping her gently to her feet. "I'm not just giving you bread. I'm giving you something much more. Because today, Amaka, your story changes." Amaka froze. She looked at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "To where, sir?" she whispered. "To your house," Jonathan said softly. "I want to meet the little girl who has the heart of a lion for a mother." But before this moment of grace, Amaka's life was already a long tale of sorrow. She was just a child when the nightmare started. One quiet night in Enugu, Amaka, then 11 years old, was curled up in bed when the thunder of gunshots shook the neighborhood. Armed robbers had stormed their family home. They took everything, the television, jewelry, her father's salary in cash, and then, in front of her innocent eyes, they shot her mother and father. The police came hours later. No arrests, no hope, just a body bag, just silence. No uncles stepped in, no aunts came to take her in. Amaka was now an orphan, left with nothing but a small wooden box containing her mother's earrings and a memory of her father's laughter. She fought hard. She did odd jobs, hawked oranges after school, and somehow graduated secondary school at 18. That's when Uche came into her life. He was a young taxi driver, gentle, funny, and kind. He saw beyond her worn clothes and tired eyes. He proposed to her when she turned 20, and in him, Amaka found a sliver of peace. She abandoned her dream of becoming a nurse. Instead, she became a housewife, pouring all her love into their tiny one-room apartment in Lagos and their daughter, Adana, who was born with the softest eyes and a smile just like her father's. But happiness didn't last. When Adana was just 3 years old, tragedy came knocking again. Uche was on his way home after a night shift when car snatchers attacked him. He refused to surrender. He fought back, and in that desperate attempt to escape, he was stabbed and his body dumped by the roadside. The police found his corpse the next morning. When it was brought home in a white nylon bag, Amaka collapsed beside it, screaming for someone to wake her up from the nightmare. She thought of ending it all that day. She wanted to die with him. But Adana's little hand tugging at her wrapper reminded her that she couldn't. She had to live for her. But how? No money. No job. No savings. Nothing. The sound of thunder cracked the sky as Amaka dashed through the streets, holding her daughter on her back, her wet wrapper barely covering the child. Adana had grown weak from hunger. Her small fingers were cold, her lips pale. "Don't sleep," Amaka whispered. "We're almost home." The construction site boss, Samson, had refused to pay her. She had begged on her knees, But the man laughed, saying, "If you want money, go and marry another husband." He pushed her out with her daughter, locking the gate behind them. Back at their tiny room, the roof leaked. Amaka placed Adana on the floor, wrapped her in dry clothes, and stared at her child's barely breathing body. Her stomach churned in panic. Adana's breath was shallow. She needed food. Right now. Desperate, barefoot, and with her heart pounding in her chest, Amaka left her daughter and walked to the nearest supermarket, Namdi Mart. It was bright, beautiful, and full of life, everything her world was not. She slipped in quietly. Her tattered Ankara gown clung to her skin, still wet from the storm. Her hair was tangled, her eyes sunken. She passed rows of glowing shelves, eyes scanning for one thing, only bread. And there it was, a golden loaf, resting on the lower shelf. Her hand reached out. She grabbed it and turned toward the door. She was almost out. Then, "Hey, you, stop there!" The voice struck like lightning. She froze, turned, and everything she had buried, the pain, the shame, the fear, came rushing back. The man stepping toward her didn't look like a manager or a security guard. He was tall, regal, powerful. His voice made the walls vibrate. That's when Amaka fell on her knees and began to plead. The rest, as you already know, would change her life forever. But what happens next, in that hospital room with Adana, and the days that follow in Jonathan's mansion, is even more unbelievable. The Bentley pulled to a gentle stop in front of a rusty iron gate with peeling green paint. Jonathan stepped out first. The polished black shoes on his feet did not belong here on this cracked, muddy earth, littered with broken tiles and plastic bags. But he didn't flinch. Amaka stood still beside the car, unsure if she was dreaming. "Is this your place?" Jonathan asked gently. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "Yes, sir. We live in the back, the room with the curtain instead of a door." Jonathan didn't say anything. He motioned for his driver to wait and followed her. They moved past old buckets, chickens scratching the floor, a woman frying a kara at the corner who paused as she saw the expensive car and man in fine kaftan walk by. Whispers started. Then they reached it, the room, a dimly lit, suffocating space that smelled of wet walls and old kerosene. On the torn mattress in the corner lay Adana, so small, so still. Her lips were dry, her skin pale. Jonathan's chest tightened. "Adana," Amaka called softly, kneeling beside her. "Adana, wake up, baby. I brought food." But the girl didn't move. "Please." Amaka turned to Jonathan, panic rising in her voice. "Help me. Please don't let her die." Jonathan's mind raced. "We need to leave. Now." The nurses at St. Grace Memorial Hospital snapped into action the moment the billionaire stormed through the doors, a small girl wrapped in a wet wrapper in his arms, followed by a disheveled woman sobbing behind him. "She's burning up," the doctor said, checking her vitals. "Severe hypoglycemia, fever, weak pulse." "Save her," Jonathan said. "Do whatever it takes." Adana was rushed to the emergency room. Amaka tried to follow, but the nurses stopped her. "You have to wait here." She crumbled to the floor. Jonathan sat beside her silently, his hands clenched. He hadn't realized his heart was pounding like this. He hadn't felt this, alive in years. And as they waited, memories flooded his mind. Jonathan's silent wounds. His wife, Ngozi, had once told him, "When you bless the world blesses you back." She said it the morning before she and their 6-year-old daughter, Kamzi, boarded a flight to Abuja for a family wedding. The plane never made it. A faulty engine. The crash site was found near Jos 2 days later. Jonathan never smiled the same way again. He buried himself in work, expanded his supermarket chain across West Africa, made billions. But the house remained silent. The laughter gone, the toys untouched. And he stopped looking people in the eyes. Until today. Back to the present. Amaka's hands trembled as she stared at the hospital floor. "I thought she would die before I returned. I almost gave up. I was going to knock on 10 more doors. Beg anyone." Jonathan turned to her, How long have you lived like this? Since Uche died, she whispered. Your husband? She nodded. Car snatchers. He tried to fight. They killed him and took the car. His body was dumped near a canal. I wanted to die with him, but Adana was 3. She needed me. She looked up, her eyes swollen. People came for his burial. They cried. They ate. They left. No one helped me. I started carrying blocks at construction sites. Some days I sold sachet water. Other days I cleaned gutters. Anything just so Adana could eat. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. And today? Today? She chuckled sadly. Today, the rain came. She got soaked. Samson, the site head, refused to pay me. She started shaking. I had nothing left, so I stole. For the first time in my life, I stole a loaf of bread. A nurse came out, face neutral. Amaka stood up immediately, gripping her wrapper tightly. How is she? Is she? She's stable, the nurse said with a smile. We've got her on fluids. Her temperature is coming down. She should wake up soon. Amaka dropped to her knees again, but this time in relief. Thank you, Jesus, she whispered. Jonathan turned to the nurse. Prepare a room, a private ward, and keep her on observation. Everything she needs, add it to my account. Yes, sir. 4 days passed like a gentle breeze. Amaka stayed beside her daughter's bed, singing softly to her as she recovered. Nurses came and went. Jonathan returned each evening, bringing fresh clothes, warm food, and a calm voice that reassured them both. On the 4th day, Adana sat up for the first time. Mummy? She whispered. Who is that man? Amaka smiled, brushing her daughter's hair. He's an angel, baby. That evening, as discharge papers were signed, Amaka started to gather her things to return to the room they called home, but Jonathan shook his head. You're not going back there. She paused. What do you mean, sir? You and Adana are coming with me. I live in a big house. Too big. Too empty. Amaka stared at him. No, we can't. I insist, he said gently. Let my mansion be your home for now. You've fought long enough. Arrival at the mansion. As the black Bentley pulled through the golden gates of Namdi Estate, Amaka clutched her daughter tightly, stunned by the fountains, the trimmed flowers, the glass windows that touched the sky. Maids in white uniforms waited at the front door. Welcome, madam. Welcome, young miss, they said with warm smiles. Jonathan led them to their new roomy-spacious suite with a walk-in closet, a giant bed, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a movie. Adana jumped on the bed with glee, squealing. Amaka stood still and cried, Why are you helping me? That night, after Adana had fallen asleep, wrapped in fluffy white sheets, Amaka found Jonathan sitting in the garden behind the mansion, gazing at the stars. She walked slowly toward him, dressed in a clean nightgown the maids had given her. Sir? She said softly. He turned. Can't sleep? No, I just wanted to ask. Why? Why are you helping us, even when I tried to steal from you? Jonathan smiled. I've lost everything before, he said. I've known the silence of an empty house. And I've also realized that what we give out of love, out of kindness, all we ever truly own. Amaka's lips trembled. I thought I had no worth. But you made me feel seen again. And you deserve it, he said. You're not weak. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. They sat in silence under the moonlight. But this was only the beginning, because soon Adana would return to school, and Jonathan would do something even more unexpected. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the floor-length curtains of the guest suite in Namdi Estate. Amaka stood by the window, watching Adana laugh as she played in the garden with one of the maids. It felt surreal. Just a week ago, they had both shivered under the rain, stomachs growling, tears falling like waterfalls. Now, Adana's cheeks glowed with health. And Amaka? She had never worn a silk nightgown in her life until now. There was a knock at the door. Come in, she said softly. It was Jonathan, dressed in a simple grey kaftan, holding a folder. I have something for you, he said. Amaka looked confused. Sir, you've already done more than I can ever repay. He handed her the folder. "Open it." Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped it open. Her eyes widened. Inside was a school application, already filled out with her name on it. University of Lagos. Basic Sciences. Pre-nursing program. Amaka covered her mouth with her hand. No, I can't. I left school over 10 years ago." Jonathan smiled. "But you never left the dream." Her voice was shaking. "But I'm a mother. I'm too old to go back." "You're 31, Amaka," he said gently. "And you told me when you were 12, after your parents died, you wanted to become a nurse. You said you wanted to help people because no one helped your mother that night." Amaka nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "You have helped people all your life. Now let someone help you." "But school fees?" "Already paid." That weekend, Amaka met her private tutor, Mrs. Olamide, a retired university lecturer. The woman was strict but kind and began brushing Amaka up in biology, chemistry, and English. Adana would often sit nearby doing her own homework. Jonathan had enrolled her in one of the top private schools in Lekki. Her uniforms were crisp, her backpack new. She made friends quickly and started excelling in class. Every evening, after their lessons, Amaka and Jonathan would walk together in the garden, talking about life, about grief, about healing. He never rushed her. He never made her feel small. She began to smile again. 3 months later, Amaka sat across from a panel at the university entrance exam interview. She clutched her handbag, heart pounding in her chest. She had worn a plain blouse and skirt and tied her hair neatly in a bun. One of the lecturers looked at her resume and raised an eyebrow. "You haven't studied in over a decade. Why nursing now?" Amaka looked him straight in the eye. "Because my daughter almost died from hunger. Because I know what it feels like to have no one. And because I want to be someone that people can depend on. I've lived through pain. Now, I want to turn that pain into purpose." There was a pause. The lecturer smiled. "Well said." A week later, her admission letter arrived. She was in. Amaka juggled her classes and motherhood like a pro. Jonathan's driver picked her up and dropped her off every day. The house staff helped care for Adana when she was at lectures. And whenever she returned, her daughter would come running into her arms, screaming, "Mummy!" It wasn't easy. She stayed up late, studied until her eyes hurt, and failed her first chemistry quiz. But she didn't stop, because someone believed in her again. Unexpected visitors. One rainy afternoon, as Amaka returned home from campus, she saw 2 familiar faces at the gate: Samson, the rude construction site supervisor, and Mama Titi, a neighbor from her old compound. They were holding food items, looking nervous. Jonathan's gatekeeper, unsure what to do, had called Amaka. She stepped out, umbrella in hand. "What are you doing here?" Amaka asked, keeping her voice calm. Samson cleared his throat. "We heard what happened. You now live here, with Mr. Namdi. I came to apologize, for that day. The way I treated you," Mama Titi added. "And we brought food. Just to say sorry." Amaka looked at them. Once, she would have cried at this moment. Once, she would have shouted, but not now. She simply said, "Thank you. I accept your apology, but I'm no longer that woman who begged at the gate." They nodded and left. As she turned around, she saw Jonathan standing quietly behind her, smiling. "You handled that well." Amaka smiled back. "I'm learning from the best." One morning, Adana complained of a headache, then nausea, then fever. Amaka rushed her to the hospital. Her hands trembled as the doctors took blood samples. It felt like the past was haunting her again. Jonathan arrived minutes later, holding her hand as they waited. The doctor finally came out. "It's malaria," he said. "Not too serious. We'll begin treatment immediately." Amaka exhaled deeply, collapsing into a chair. "I thought I was going to lose her again," she whispered. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not on my watch." That night, as Amaka sat by Adana's bedside in the mansion, her daughter fast asleep beside her, Jonathan came in with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. He handed one to her. "Do you regret coming here?" he asked. Amaka shook her head. No. I just wonder if I'll ever be able to repay you. You already have, he said. She looked at him, puzzled. You brought life back into this house. There was silence between them, but it was warm, peaceful, and something unspoken lingered in the air, something neither of them was ready to name yet. 3 years later, the camera flashes were blinding as Adana walked across the stage in her graduation gown. She had just been awarded Best Graduating Student in Data Science from the University of Lagos. Amaka sat beside Jonathan, now dressed in a nurse's uniform, wiping tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter shine. As Adana reached the microphone to give her speech, her voice echoed through the auditorium. Most people here don't know this, but I was once that little girl who nearly died of hunger. My mother risked everything to save me, and one man saw us when the world didn't and changed our story. Mr. Jonathan Namdi, I dedicate this award to you. You are my miracle. Jonathan looked down, unable to hide the tears. Amaka touched his hand gently, and for the first time he held hers back. But this story is far from over, because that night, something unforgettable happened in the garden, and it would change everything again. The evening breeze was gentle, brushing softly against the leaves of the garden trees as the sun sank behind the mansion's tall marble pillars. Golden light bathed the backyard where Jonathan stood alone, pacing slowly, a velvet box tucked secretly in his palm. He could still hear Adana's speech from hours ago echoing in his heart. Mr. Jonathan Namdi, I dedicate this award to you. You are my miracle. Her voice had cracked with emotion, and so had his soul. He had given everything to the world, his businesses, his time, his money. But for the first time in years, he had received something deeper in return, a family. And now, it was time to give them more than shelter. It was time to give them his heart. Back in the mansion, Adana notices. Adana stood at her bedroom window, still in her graduation gown, watching Jonathan pace the garden alone. She smiled softly, then turned as her mother walked in, still in her nurse's uniform, hair neatly packed in a bun, her face glowing with pride and disbelief. I still feel like I'm dreaming, Amaka said, looking at her daughter. You, graduating top of your class, a job offer already waiting. Do you remember that night? Adana nodded slowly. I do. I remember the hunger, the cold, your eyes. You almost died, Amaka whispered. But you saved me, Adana replied. And then, he saved us both. She paused and gave her mum a teasing grin. Speaking of Jonathan, he's been out there for a while. Amaka blushed. He said he needed fresh air. Or maybe, he's waiting for someone to come outside. Amaka gave her a playful scowl, but her heartbeat was racing. She slowly stepped out of the room. The sun had almost disappeared when Amaka stepped into the garden. Jonathan stood near the old wooden bench where they had once sat on the night Adana recovered in the hospital. His back was turned to her. Sir, she started. He turned around fast. Too fast. Amaka froze. He was down on one knee. A small velvet box opened in his hand. Her breath caught in her chest. Amaka, he said, his voice steady but emotional. You came into my life during a moment when I had nothing left but wealth and silence. You gave this home a heartbeat again. You made me laugh. You taught me what strength looks like. You've raised a daughter any man would be proud of. And you never asked me for a thing. He paused. But I want to give you everything. Amaka's eyes filled with tears. Will you marry me? The world stood still. She covered her mouth, stepping back in disbelief, then forward again as tears spilled from her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes, Jonathan, yes! He slid the ring on her finger, and the moment their hands touched, it felt like the final piece of a long, painful puzzle had finally found its place. Adana came running from the house, laughing and crying as she hugged them both. I knew it, she screamed, wiping her cheeks. I just knew it. 9 months later, the private room at St. Grace Memorial Hospital was filled with joyful voices and gentle music playing from the speakers. Balloons floated in the corner and nurses smiled as they peeked through the doorway. Jonathan sat beside the hospital bed, cradling 2 small bundles in his arms. One boy was sound asleep, the other yawned as he stretched his little fingers. Joshua and Jerry. Amaka, now Mrs. Amaka Namdi, lay in bed, glowing with joy and exhaustion. Her eyes met Jonathan's, and she whispered, "I can't believe this is my life." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You earned it." Adana entered the room, now dressed in corporate attire, holding a large bouquet. She walked over and gently kissed her mum on the cheek. "Congratulations, Mum." Then she looked at Jonathan. "Thank you, Daddy." Jonathan's eyes filled again, and he whispered, "That's the first time you've called me that." Adana smiled, blinking away tears. "It won't be the last." 2 years later, the church in Victoria Island was packed with guests, fresh roses, white drapes, and gold chairs. Soft violins played in the background. Jonathan stood proudly at the entrance, dressed in a regal wine-coloured agbada. On his arm was Adana, dressed in a flowing white wedding gown, her face glowing beneath her veil. As they walked down the aisle, tears filled his eyes again. She was no longer the sick little girl on the cold floor of a tiny room. She was a brilliant woman, a bride. Waiting at the altar was Amaka Anderson, a top accountant at a major oil firm, who looked completely lost in love. As Jonathan gave her hand to Amaka, he whispered, "She's stronger than you know. Treat her well." Amaka nodded. "I will, sir." After the ceremony, during the reception, Jonathan and Amaka danced slowly under the lights, their twin boys giggling nearby as a nanny entertained them. And for the first time in decades, Jonathan laughed, real laugh, the kind he hadn't heard from himself since his daughter Kamsi passed. Life had brought him full circle, from loss to love. 2 years into Adana's marriage, the family gathered in the mansion's garden, again this time to celebrate her daughter's birth. They named her Chioma. Amaka held her granddaughter in her arms, rocking her gently. "She has your smile," she said to Adana. "And your strength," Adana whispered back. Jonathan sat nearby, bouncing Joshua on his knee, while Jerry tugged at his agbada sleeve. "Grandpa," Jerry said, "tell us a story." And so he began. But just before the night ended, Amaka stood and tapped a glass. She had one last thing to say. "My name is Amaka Namdi," she began, her voice steady, her words reaching every corner of the silent garden. "Years ago, I was a widow, a broken woman who stole a loaf of bread to save her sick daughter. That night, I thought my story was ending." She paused, looking at Jonathan. But instead, it was just beginning. The audience at the Remembrance Gathering sat in complete silence. Every seat in the Namdi Foundation Hall was filled friends, old neighbors, hospital staff, students, dignitaries, and workers from Jonathan's company. Some wiped their eyes with tissues. Others simply stared ahead, unable to believe what they were hearing. Amaka stood at the podium, wearing a long, flowing sky-blue lace gown. Her voice was clear, strong, but emotional. "I was nothing when he found me," she continued, gripping the microphone gently. "I had nothing to my Namano money, not hope, not even food to feed my daughter. I was dirty, wet from the rain, and ready to be arrested for stealing bread." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She smiled softly and turned to look at her husband. Jonathan sat in the front row, holding their twin boys, Joshua and Jerry. His eyes were glassy. Adana sat beside him, one arm around her husband Amaka, the other cradling baby Chioma. "But that man," Amaka continued, voice thick with gratitude, "he didn't arrest me. He didn't shame me. He gave me bread. Then he gave me his heart. He saved my daughter from dying. He gave me back my dream. He put me through school, made me a nurse, and gave me a home where I was once homeless. And today, I am his wife, his best friend, the mother of his sons, and the proud mother of a data scientist who now helps young girls across Nigeria." The room erupted into applause, but Amaka wasn't done yet. Flashback. It had started 1 year after the twins were born. Amaka had been volunteering at a hospital when she treated a young homeless girl who fainted from hunger. The memory of her own suffering returned like a wave. That night, she and Jonathan sat under the stars. "We've helped us," she told him. "Now it's time to help others." So they launched the Namdi Foundation, a non-profit that gave housing, scholarships, food, and mentorship to struggling single mothers and orphans across Nigeria. In 5 years, the foundation had enrolled over 10 children in school, helped 200 women start small businesses, and provided emergency shelter to countless families. Amaka and Adana became the face of hope, and Jonathan, the quiet hero behind it all. Back to the present, the powerful closing. Amaka raised a framed photo to the crowd. It was a side-by-side picture on the left, a younger version of herself kneeling on a supermarket floor, soaked and crying, clutching a loaf of bread. On the right, a recent photo of her, in a white coat, stethoscope around her neck, holding the hands of a sick child. The transformation was stunning. "To the world, it was just a loaf of bread," she said. "But to me, it was the beginning of a new life. To anyone watching or listening, never, ever give up on yourself. Even if the world turns away from you, your story can still change. Sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness." Tears streamed down faces. Some stood to clap. Others knelt in prayer. And Jonathan, he just sat there, overwhelmed with emotion, looking at the woman who once knelt at his supermarket floor and was now standing taller than ever before. Final twist. Later that night, after everyone had left the hall, Amaka returned to the mansion. She was placing away old documents when she discovered a sealed envelope with Ngozi Namdi, written in delicate cursive. It had been tucked between the pages of an old family Bible in Jonathan's study. She opened it gently, unsure what she'd find. It read, "To my dearest Jonathan, if you ever find someone who reminds you that your heart is still beating, someone who makes the mansion feel alive again, don't let them go. I hope one day love finds you again. Love, Ngozi." Amaka placed a hand over her heart. She walked to the balcony and saw Jonathan there, gently rocking the twins to sleep. "I found something," she whispered. He looked up. She placed the letter in his hands. He read it slowly. By the time he finished, he pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "She would have loved you," he whispered. "I hope I make her proud," Amaka said softly. "You already have," he replied. Legacy continues. 10 years later, Adana became one of the most respected data scientists in Africa. She launched a scholarship program for girls in tech called Chioma Code, named after her daughter. Joshua and Jerry, now teenagers, started a podcast called Bread to Billionaire, where they interviewed people who rose from nothing. And every year, on the anniversary of that unforgettable moment at the supermarket, the family gathered with hundreds of others to give away free bread across major markets in Nigeria. It became a tradition known nationwide as Bread of Hope Day. The supermarket, 10 years later, a young girl, barely 12, dressed in ragged clothes, stood frozen at the entrance of a supermarket, eyeing the bread shelf. She took a step, but before she could reach for anything, a soft hand touched her shoulder. It was Amaka. She knelt down and smiled. "You don't need to steal it, my dear," she said warmly. "You just need someone to believe in you." And as the girl broke into tears, Jonathan appeared beside her with a fresh loaf. "We've been waiting for you," he said. If you like this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.